Hi, my name is Skyler Wilkes, and I decided to do my research presentation on the differences in Greek and modern comedies. Just as a little disclaimer, there will probably be a few mispronounced Greek names and terms, but hopefully it makes up for them if I mispronounce them confidently. Anyway, with that being said, I will get into the presentation. Love, politics, and sex. These are all often themes of comedies, but not just today's comedies. These are actually very common themes of Greek comedies as well. In ancient Greece, there were three basic types of plays: satyr plays, tragedies, and of course comedies. Just so no one gets confused, I'll quickly run through the definitions of these. Tragedies were plays in which the main character is brought to ruin, especially as a consequence of his or her hamartia, moral weakness, or inability to cope with unfavorable circumstances. For satyr plays, I just took this one directly from the dictionary because I wasn't entirely sure how to word this on my own. So satyr plays were an ancient Greek form of tragicomedy, similar in spirit to the bawdy satire of burlesque. They featured choruses of satyrs, were based on Greek mythology, and were full of mock drunkenness, brazen sexuality, including phallic props, pranks, sight gags, and general merriment. Basically, they were just making a big joke out of the tragedies. And the satyr plays were typically performed after a trilogy of tragedies had been performed, and it would go on to separate the tragedies from whatever was coming next. Comedies were amusing plays that were split into three different periods during ancient Greece. These periods were Old Comedy, beginning in 446 BC, Middle Comedy. There isn't really a clear start date for this one. Old Comedy just kind of fades into Middle Comedy until the final period, New Comedy, starts around 323 BC and ends about 260 BC. These types of plays ruled the stage at the time. We have the most access and knowledge to the tragedies that were written at this time, so it's expected that we know more about them than the other two types of plays. This is both because tragedies were deemed the most important type of play, and also because there were more tragedies than comedies or satyr plays preserved throughout the years. Though the famous Dionysian festivals were centered around tragedies, they still featured both comedies and satyr plays. The history of the theater textbook states that comedy was accepted into the city Dionysia in 487 or 486 BC, which is actually before Old Comedy was said to have began. This made comedies the last dramatic form to receive official recognition in Athens. According to Ancient History Encyclopedia, the origins of comedy have been lost in the mists of prehistory. However, we do know that the poems of Archilochus and Hipponax, as well as Greek pottery, are an early source of comedy. The pottery would sometimes depict phallic images or other such sexual imagery. After this, the traditional Greek comedy evolved. I was interested in finding the differences between the original Greek comedies and comedies today, and was surprised to find that they are not as different as I expected. Ancient Greek comedies typically followed a formula or structure: the parados, agon, parabasis, and finally the exodus. The parados is the entrance of the chorus. Once they entered, they would do a song and maybe a dance, and then the second part of the show, the agon, is where the main characters are introduced and the main plot is taking place. The third phase is called the parabasis, and is when the audiences would be directly spoken to by the chorus. The last section of the traditional Greek comedy was aptly called the exodus. The exodus was similar to the finale of a musical today, where the chorus would come back out and perform yet another song and dance to end the show, and then of course they would exit. It is also well known that the use of masks was an integral part of Greek drama. These masks allowed multiple characters to be played by a single actor, and also allowed the audiences to be more likely to read the expression intended for the role, since facial expressions would be much too small to read given the enormity of the Greek amphitheaters of the time. According to PBS.org, the original comedies were satires that made fun of powerful men for being vain and foolish. Sound familiar? This just goes to show that people have always used satire as a way to discuss the people in power without outright calling them out, and that this is not a modern concept. Aristophanes is, according to theaterhistory.com, the greatest comedian of his age and maybe even in history. It has been said that Aristophanes was an unmannerly buffoon, but even so, he was clearly a genius in his own right and wrote plays that have stuck around for centuries. Some of these plays are The Frogs, The Clouds, The Wasps, and of course Lysistrata. Modern comedies don't have exactly the same format as that of the ancient Greek comedies. As far as structure, they just stick to the classic Aristotelian structure that most plays stick to. This format, of course, is also a Greek structure: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and denouement. Though, when you think about it, this structure is not really that different from the original one. The exposition would be roughly the same as the parados. These are both the parts of the play in which the story is being set up. The rising action and climax would likely go in the Aegon, and the falling action and denouement would probably take place in the Exodus. The only one that we don't generally use today would be the parabasis, and it's not that we don't have the audience being addressed directly, it's just we don't have a specific section of the play for that to happen in. As previously mentioned, today's comedies frequently have similar ideas as those that the Greeks had 2,500 years ago. One would think that with the vast time difference, there would also be a large disconnect in themes in the plays written during this time. However, that is simply not the case. People in ancient Greece were entertained by the same kinds of things that entertain us today, which really makes sense considering the amount of Greek plays being adapted for audiences today. You may think, oh, if it has to be adapted, they can't be that similar, right? But no, that's actually not the case. The themes are still the same, they can just be adapted and updated so that the context makes more sense to today's audiences, so that the same point is still made, even if every detail doesn't stay exactly the same. We like to think that people have evolved so much in the past 2,500 years, but let's face it, we're really not that different from the ancient Greeks. We just have technology that they didn't. Charles Wyndham stated in The Tendencies of Modern Comedy that there has never been a time when the drama has had a stronger hold on the public mind than today. Wyndham wrote this way back in 1889. Theater has been majorly popular throughout the course of history, and with every new generation this is the case. However, I think Wyndham may be wrong here, seeing as the ancient Greeks held frequent festivals celebrating Dionysus by performing their plays. These plays were a huge part of Greek society, and I would be willing to say that Greek theater likely had a stronger hold on its audience than that during Wyndham's time, or any other time for that matter. The Greek theater is one of the most famous in history because it is generally thought of as where the theater started. And while comedy wasn't necessarily the most popular type of play at the time, it certainly seems to be the most unchanged. For the most part, all that really seems to have changed is updated language and context. All in all, I'd say our comedy today is still very similar to that which the ancient Greeks enjoyed. Thank you.